You don't have to be particularly charismatic to be a right-wing commentator. You don't even need to take a shower frequently to be a right-wing commentator. So why is it, if it's that much simpler to be a right-wing commentator, why the would anybody grift to the left? Why would anybody do that? What? This guy explains why there's no alt-left pipeline? Yeah, I can tell you why. Because there is no... The alt-left would be Marxist, okay? They would be Marxist. Most of their criticism revolves around economic inequality and criticizing millionaires and billionaires. Or at least the ways in which commodities are produced and the relations to the means of production and how society has been designed around making sure that this system continues. In that regard, no amount of, no collective, no one who has wealth is going to turn around and fund someone saying, yeah, we should claw back all of your power and money. That's it.
Political videos for very long, and to be fair, I haven't really been alive for very long at the ripe old age of 23. I, like many of you, have been steeping in the world of online political discourse for what has felt like my entire life. I also made the grave mistake of pursuing a degree in a political social science, so luckily for me, my entire education has also revolved around various attempts to understand how politics operates in the age of the internet. And one of the most common political themes I've seen referred to in the past decade on social media is that of the alt-right pipeline. The idea is that there's a mechanism that exists on the internet which, primarily through recommendation algorithms on video sharing sites like YouTube or TikTok, captures the attention of your average Joe and slowly pushes their views further and further toward the right. Now, in academia, the alt-right pipeline term refers specifically to this algorithmic mechanism. However, I think most of us use it in a more broad way to sort of refer to the process of radicalization that can occur not just on video sharing sites, but on other social media, forums and Shan boards, and in certain offline local communities as well. And while there is a lot of media out there talking about the concept of the alt-right pipeline and how it works, I want to pose a different question today. Why is there no alt-left pipeline?
Money.
We're going to walk through a quick framework to answer that question as simply as we can, but before we do that, a quick disclaimer. This is not going to be incredibly in-depth in terms of analysis, but I do plan on expanding on some of these topics in later videos. The main goal is to answer the question without overly complicating things. So, let's get on with that. There's a pretty logical through line that we can track in order to figure out why the alt-right pipeline works, and by negation, why there couldn't be a true alt-left pipeline of a similar nature.
Money. In the simplest terms, it's money. If you scratch the surface of that commentary a little bit, you'll recognize that it's also Red Scare propaganda and how pervasive that is. And that is precisely the same reason why you hear ostensibly leftist people constantly attacking other leftists while using right-wing terminology. The notion that socialism, for example, is a poverty cult is unironically reactionary propaganda. And yet it's not just Ben Shapiro that says that. Plenty prominent liberals who are aligned with socialists on many issues, with the exception of maintaining capitalism, will actively utilize that. Anarchists will actively also say, well, you know what? You're right, actually. It's ridiculous. You could not be successful in any way, shape, or form. You are basically taking advantage of the system. That's all you're doing, and you're doing it for personal benefit. Nobody, for some reason, ever turns around and thinks, well, if someone is a grifter, let's say someone is a prominent left-wing commentator, if they're a grifter, why wouldn't they grift to the right? The right is a captive market. There's plenty of people that just simply want their own idiotic worldview regurgitated back to them. You don't have to be particularly charismatic to be a right-wing commentator. You don't even need to take a shower frequently to be a right-wing commentator. So why is it? If it's that much simpler and much more fortuitous to be a right-wing commentator, why the would anybody grift to the left? Why would anybody do that? The answer is nobody does that. That's why when people are grifting, they grift to the right. That's why so many prominent leftist figures will either organically or due to the grift, slowly but surely move to the right. It's idiotic.
First, we need to sort out what the goal of a radicalization pipeline is. In my understanding, its goal is to capture the attention of one who is relatively disinterested in politics, the majority of people, and not only make them interested in politics, but eventually interested in radical politics and political activism in favor of the community that radicalized them. Since I'm American, I'm going to use our political parties in history for the rest of this video, but I think the ideas are relatively sound when used in other contexts. The most important component in the modern alt-right pipeline, in my opinion, is the media ecosystem that the Republican Party has been building since the 1990s. I could go on for hours about this one, but I will spare you that for now. All we need to know is that back in the early 1900s, there was a large public distrust in Republican economic policy after the Great Depression. This caused the Republican Party to more closely align itself with the Democrats, not just in economic policy, but later in other social policy efforts as well. The alignment.
Yup. We're post-Reagan, we're living in the reverse of the FDR momentum. Well, not even post-Reagan, post-Nixon, I would say. Like, the Nixon era basically completely flipped it. And it's gotten worse and worse year over year, and Reagan was the apex. But up until Nixon, the attitude was always the same. Imagine decades of the Republican Party operating in the same exact way that the Democratic Party is operating, where they constantly have to capitulate to the New Deal Democrats and their unimaginably popular agenda. Think about that. Another reason why the left will never succeed in anything is because of this. Hi, Hassan. This may be unimportant, but have you considered getting reusable chopsticks? They have some nice ones at IKEA. I love you, by the way. Obviously, this person is being kind. They're not making a big deal out of it. I'm not realizing that I am technically reusing chopsticks that they've sent me. Instead of throwing it out, I'm just using the chopsticks that they sent me. And also, I do have reusable chopsticks on top of that. But of course, normally this kind of marginal disagreement can become a major problem in the left. I'm using this chatter as a talking point here, not saying this chatter is engaging in that. Oftentimes, these sorts of minor disagreements on the left will lead to genuine infighting for no reason whatsoever. I wasn't sitting on the chatter.
Alignment between the two parties is what eventually allowed for the New Deal era to occur, since both parties agreed on a general direction for the country, only disagreeing on how to implement certain policies, for the most part. And as we well know, in regards to most social movements, each surge in a certain ideology is met with an opposing reaction, and this is effectively what allowed Ronald Reagan to take the presidency in 1980. What is important to understand at this point is that the strategy of the Republican Party began to shift. They noticed that their conservative policy proposals were relatively unpopular amongst the general public, especially in states required to win elections. If they could instead create a system where politics was more about culture than actual policies, they could attempt to convince Americans that
the number one guy in the modern era for this is also Newt Gingrich, the guy who basically turned this into a science. Not to say that there wasn't culture war issues in the Nixon era or the Reagan era. Of course there were. But Newt Gingrich definitely supercharged this. I would say that he was a pivotal figurehead. The other pivotal figure in terms of like modern Republican Party strategy, aside from like the Dick Cheneys of the world and yada yada yada, I think was certainly Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is when the Republican Party learned the lesson that if they do perma-obstructionism to a Democratic administration, they will literally suffer zero repercussions. And actually, as a matter of fact, they'll benefit from it tremendously. And everyone will blame the admin for it.
that they were the right choice to pick because they were the more patriotic or constitutional or working class party, despite there being a clear dissonance between those phrases and their actual policy proposals. And this is where the media ecosystem comes in. In the 1990s, the Republican Party and its donors began to invest a significant amount of funds and resources into building a widespread media apparatus with the goal of uniting the many small conservative coalitions throughout the country.
It's pretty funny because Felix literally did a reading series on Chapo on just this. Like this video, the 13-minute summary of this video is something that Felix did on Chapo, the media operations of the Republican Party, the contemporary Republican Party, and its evolution. It's called Seeking a Friend. F-R-E-N. It's fantastic.
Under a single narrative. The idea was to convince anyone from business owners to evangelicals to even your average dissatisfied American that the establishment Democrats were coming to destroy the very fabric of the United States and that the small town Republicans were going to stop them, so long as you donate to them and vote for them. This media narrative also consisted of broad moral panics, reimaginings of American history, and an oddly postmodern skepticism and pessimism, not only about the Democrats, but also any Republicans that might sympathize with their causes. And this narrative caught on like wildfire, whether it be on AM radio with Rush Limbaugh or cable news with Sean Hannity and the Fox News crew, and it served as the foundation for the Republican strategy on how to win elections. If you can't make people vote for your party, make them vote against the other. Let's move on to the second point. These conservative narratives, like blaming economic instability solely on immigration or claiming that the LGBT community is corrupting children, bigotry in general toward any non-straight cisgender white male group, they generate fear. And let me be clear, both parties attempt to play into these narratives to try and win elections. However, it is important to note that there are multiple studies, which I've linked in the description, that show that individuals with conservative policy leanings are also more likely to focus on negative narratives and to have increased sensitivity to perceived threats. In that context, it makes sense why both parties try to use these narratives to win elections. Republicans need to activate every conservative that they can, and Democrats want to win on the margins by flipping center-right Republican voters. Both parties engaging with negative, fearful narratives is also great for the alt-right pipeline because fear makes people want to protect themselves and the things they love. And alt-right ideals are broadly centered around hatred toward outgroups, ultra-conservative social policies, and isolationism and nationalism, all of which—
Thank you for fighting the good fight, brave chatter. The Democratic Party's approval ratings will certainly go up after this. I can't think of anyone more out of touch than a guy who looks at like a 72% disapproval rating within the Democratic Party and turns around and goes, is this group of the people who didn't vote for the Democrats? First of all, like more than 80% of this community voted for the Democrats. But I like that you made a sock account to imagine a thing that didn't happen, to go and yell about perceived grievances instead of yelling at your party to go out and, do some goddamn work so that they can restore some confidence from the American population that recognizes that the Dems are inherently hostile to them and their existence. You are unfortunately a small-minded person, a sucker, a mark, a rube. You go and yell at voters who are like-minded, have the same class interests as you do, instead of recognizing that if the Democratic Party had actually followed through on any sort of commitment to materially improve the lives, like real commitments, not marginal, tax cuts for small businesses type, broad, sweeping change, radical change that clearly the people were demanding, that they probably would have been able to defeat Donald Trump. And no, this is not an honest question. You are a dishonest person. You're a dishonest person for multiple different reasons. Okay? You're dishonest because you assume that this community didn't vote against Donald Trump. You're also dishonest because you think the uncommitted Democratic voter base, hangout space, is filled to the brim with cucks that didn't vote. You're dishonest because you and I are fundamentally at odds with the way that we see the world. I believe in democracy. which means you are supposed to extract concessions from your elected representatives. You don't. You just think that the Democratic Party must win unconditionally at all costs. And I understand where that comes from, because clearly Donald Trump is worse, right? You keep saying the data is there. Well, if you understood anything about the data, you would recognize that third-party voters or the uncommitted voters were not the reason why Kamala Harris lost, and that even if all third-party voters actually voted for Kamala Harris, which, by the way, again, don't know why that's a thing, Kamala Harris still would have lost to Donald Trump. That's how bad of a campaign she ran. You're also in one of the few communities that opens its doors to liberals that actively complained about the many mistakes that the Kamala Harris campaign was making. Mistakes that did predictably lead to a defeat. If the Democrats truly were terrified of the growing fascist movement in this country, I suspect they wouldn't have ran a campaign alongside Liz Cheney, talking about having the most lethal military, talking about how they're going to be the deportation party and the Republicans are not good enough at deporting people. All of that only ends up legitimizing the right-wing position, and it makes Democrats look like hypocrites who are now coming to that same conclusion, that undocumented migrants are responsible for crimes. In terms of the genocide is unconscionable. This is all rhetoric. I'm talking about data. I don't think you understand the lesson that data is supposed to tell you. A YouGov poll revealed that among the 19 million people who voted for Joe Biden in 2020 but did not vote, nearly 29% cited the U.S.-backed war in Gaza as their top reason for staying home. Do you think that's rhetoric? Do you think that's data? Yeah, I mean, it's data, but I don't think you're interpreting the data correctly. That means that the Biden administration f***ed up spectacularly because they were so horny to murder as many Palestinian children as they possibly could that they literally gave the country on a silver platter to a fascist movement instead of, God forbid, doing the right thing and taking a strong moral opposition to genocide. Shut the up, dumbass. How do you look at that and go, oh, this means that like people are stupid and they should have voted for Joe Biden? You are a moron. Okay? God damn. It's so hard to consistently be charitable to stupid liberals. Jesus, Lord mercy, dude. I don't understand. You got everything you wanted. Joe Biden maintained the genocide, and Trump is going to maximize on the genocide. He's going to do even more of it. Okay? Not many people are insane. I'm not insane. You just showed me data that unironically proves that if you were committed to being an anti-fascist, you would have actually changed trajectory on Israel, okay? And you're looking at that and still blaming the voters for a genocide. You literally have to be the stupidest person I've ever encountered in my entire goddamn life. Holy bro, you're a poser. Oh my God. I'm looking at what Trump is planning on doing. Yes. Oh my God. I can't believe Donald Trump has talked about how he wants to ethnically displace all Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Oh, wait. Joe Biden also quietly demanded that happen. So the difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden in this regard, by the way, is the fact that Joe Biden supplied the weapons and also tried to negotiate that position, which obviously the other countries were like, no, we're not going to do that. That's ethnic cleansing. Okay. And Donald Trump was just saying the quiet part out loud, using rhetoric to get viewers, or perhaps this unimaginably unpopular position in any kind of moneyed circle, okay, in any kind of marketing initiative that immediately demands that executives come down your throat and censor you, is a position that I genuinely maintain, an anti-genocide position, okay? I don't know if you're familiar with this, but you are talking to a community that didn't even refuse to vote for Kamala Harris. But you have invented that because you need demons to attack, not realizing the real demons are the Republicans and the Democrats who are caving and capitulating to them. In the process, you quite literally have pointed to evidence that suggests that if Biden had actually done the morally correct thing, okay, put an end to the genocide that he was defending, that the Democrats probably could have won. But none of that matters because you are and you will never learn your lesson. You will consistently keep defending the Democrats, no matter what it is, playing catch up over and over and over again. That's why it's because of your entitled, smug, elitist, unconditionally pro-Democratic Party attitude at a time when the Republican Party is absolutely gutting all of our federal institutions. Any semblance of like the regulatory body is cast aside. Mass layoffs, economic collapse that's imminent. America changing its strategy in general when it comes to foreign policy and becoming even more aggressive. People despise you and your kind, okay? They despise you. They despise the Democratic Party dick riders. Do you understand? That's why the Democratic Party currently is at a 72% disapproval rating, because you're too busy turning around and yelling at other people, yelling at your potential allies, because you are a baboon, okay? You are dumb as you are in many respects no different than the dumbass Republican who voted for the Trump administration thinking, oh yeah, hell yeah, brother, we're actually going to save America. Hell yeah, we're going to save America by making sure egg prices are $25 a carton. The only difference is you're a little bit better read and possibly gay. That's it. You're just a gay Republican. That's all this is. Smug, gay Republican. That's what the liberal institutional defenders are now. And it's unimaginably annoying. You're burning the candle from both ends at that point. You have nothing salvageable. Nobody likes you, chatter. And this is why. It's so funny because the Democrats did an endless wave of unimaginable concessions to the right, and they still lost. And these morons are still complaining at the left. God damn, dude. I'm gonna die on this hill, but saying blanket rhetoric is ironic. This is a rhetorical nothing burger. Is just evident smug.
Which can be fostered by the repetition and installation of fear. Leftist ideals, however, broadly advocate for community-focused solutions that are inclusive and perhaps most importantly, new or progressive. That's why the left can't necessarily utilize fear. While the right's goal is to protect itself against perceived threats, the left's goal is to overcome obstacles of fear, to incorporate and advocate alongside groups that are marginalized and exploited by neoconservative capitalism. Instilling fear would mean to shift the blame onto someone else. Leftist movements seek to take responsibility and first create change from the inside. Fear, in the way that conservatives utilize it, is incompatible with these goals, and in the modern media landscape means that leftist ideals are less likely to spread in the public consciousness than conservative ideals. Now the third point. Young people have a lot of problems going on all the time. That's kind of what being young is about. However, for the sake of this video, we have to look at what kinds of problems would cause someone to become susceptible to the siren's call of a radicalization pipeline. In Innuendo Studios' alt-right playbook, the accumulation of problems that lead someone into a pipeline is called soul sickness. This sickness can be brought on by many things, but perhaps most importantly are trauma and isolation, especially amongst men. And to be clear, this isn't me doing a feel bad for all white men because they're racist bit, but just hear me out. Folks that have had traumatic or life-changing events occur to them are...
Is fear really incompatible? Like, can't we just outgroup billionaires? I mean, it's going to be hard to do that in a society that's designed to proselytize and showcase billionaires as like incredible deities, because the entire system is built around the false notion of meritocracy. So those guys are basically gods living amongst us. Gods that are also achievable in class status, which is, of course, also not true, but it doesn't really matter. I have a buddy who is a good dude, unapologetically pro-dem. We were chatting today. He was blown away that Gaza was a major issue for me. I think how out of touch they are with the cruelty that was happening under the Dems was such a big reason why they lost. Yeah, I think that I mean, if you're unconditionally pro-Democrat, you probably got to that position because you consume a lot of like New York Times, you consume a lot of CNN, maybe some MSNBC, and or David Pacman if you're looking at like independent media, right? Or Brian Tyler Cohen. And I'm not even shitting on Brian or David, okay? They're very nice people, but if that's the only group that you're looking at, if that's the only, like, you can isolate yourself from alternative visions if you hyper focus on only like the positive aspects of the Democratic Party, and you will design a world that is just utterly untrue. That's why a lot of people felt confused after the Harris loss. There is not a lot of there's nothing that goes beyond partisan politics when if you're doing like if you're doing mostly partisan politics, you're going to miss out on the larger picture, I think. Is what you're doing moral? What do you mean? What are you saying? Hey, Hassan Piker, you can keep teaching us about things, but who can we rally behind? Or do I really have to tuck my tail in between my legs and find DSA chapters that might know who John Brown is? What I'm learning is Hassan is more anarchist because they don't ever put their neck out for you. They just facilitate it. Communists do, anarchists don't. Yes, dude. Yes. Your mental health episode that you're going through right now is the reason is helping you arrive at the correct truth, which is that I'm not sticking my neck out at all, and I'm just trying to get all of the Marxist-Leninists to fight the battles for me. Thank you. You're right. I am definitely your enemy. Okay. How do you arrive at such a cynical worldview, dude? I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't get it. Like what is it? You want me to? I'll just go buy out a compound, okay? Purchase as many AK-47s as possible and bunker myself in there with some tannerite and die for the Marxist-Leninist cause in a country that thinks Nancy Pelosi is a socialist, dude. But I'll be based! Write a book and these people will calm down? No, because then it's still not radical enough. Okay? One must ask themselves why liberal naysayers and Republicans and even leftists have this exact same position. I'm going to be as charitable as possible and say that leftists arrive at this position because of the helplessness that they feel, the hopelessness that they feel, and that they recognize the harms that are happening, but don't understand the existing material conditions, don't understand what level of class consciousness does exist amongst the working class, because billionaires, capital owners always have had class consciousness. Okay? But plenty of leftists, okay, card-carrying Marxists, Leninists, and whatnot, also fall into this trap because they get geared by liberals and reactionary Republicans alike. Because that is how pervasive the Red Scare propaganda is in this country. This is also precisely the reason why I have so much respect for the likes of Bernie Sanders. Okay? Because in spite of my disagreements with him on key issues, it still does not matter because he has been able to, at the very least, utilize the bully pulpit in an election to generate more open-mindedness among a nation that is inherently hostile to socialism.
Most likely to become susceptible to these right-wing narratives as they...
Ironically, though, this is another problem with the broader left in general. People also fall into that same, like, this person is hypocritical, the same cynical assessment that right-wingers who don't even agree with your worldview routinely weaponize. Okay? It is, in my estimation, a testament to how pervasive anti-socialist thought is in this country.
They not only provide an outlet for anger and a community to fill in those support roles that might have otherwise been lost through their trauma, but also a series of common enemies to direct that anger toward as a community. This is why, anecdotally, divorced dads and young lonely men are the most likely to fall into these pipelines, since modern conservative social standards isolate and generally prevent men from expressing camaraderie or brotherly love for each other. Those pesky leftist community-oriented vibes are not at all what these folks are looking for. Often, they feel victimized by the state or by their ex-wives or their classmates or whoever else, and they just want a place to direct that anger. Rarely do they ever want a solution to it. Their problems are just a given to them. On to the fourth point. Any given person that feels vaguely victimized then is a lot more likely to pay attention to the more surface level commentators on the right, because they broadly speak to that person's worsening material conditions without getting too in the weeds about actual politics. In the 90s, this character was played by Limbaugh, Hannity, Buchanan, and Fox News in general, and nowadays it's Elon Musk, Jordan Peterson, Dave Rubin, and Ben Shapiro, just to name a few. The left simply does not have the same game. The Democratic Party funds liberal news outlets and commentators, not leftist commentators. So the only place folks are able to be introduced to leftist commentary is on BreadTube? I love PhilosophyTube and ContraPoints, of course, but they're just unable to meet the vast majority of people where
I'm not going to lie. I suspect this person is not too fond of me, judging by
they are, especially if those people are dissatisfied with what they perceive as culture war persecution against them. The Republican Party has bet its entire future on meeting these people, straight men and their wives, where they are, and not just slowly pushing them positively toward the right, but negatively away from anything perceived as leftist. And the last point. This funneling of regular Joes into rival political teams has created an environment in which parties seeps into our personal identities and our identities into our parties. The process of this occurring is one of a few forms of political polarization. And in a politically polarized country, the average person becomes significantly more anxious regarding political outcomes, and guess which party created a whole media ecosystem to take advantage of this anxiety? It's actually both parties, but the Democrats' media ecosystem is also primed against leftists, since leftist positions are too extreme to advocate for, which is also not the best hill for the Democrats to die on, because, to cite a recent example, some of Kamala Harris's most successful campaign promises during her 2024 election were her pledge to prevent grocery price gouging.
Okay, maybe he is a fan. I don't know.
Her plan to have a 25% income tax for billionaires, and the strengthening of collective bargaining laws for unions, all of which polled with over 60% favorability amongst the general electorate, and all of which are leftist policy proposals, which she quickly abandoned due to her party's priming against leftists and their policies.
Well, it's not even priming against the parties, priming against the leftists and their policies. It was because the Democratic Party is directly... the Democratic Party has the same corporate benefactors that the Republicans do by their class position. They might have some disagreements in terms of like social policy or whatever, but ultimately they have the exact same corporate benefactors. Tony West, who is the legal counsel for Uber, is Kamala Harris's brother-in-law, and he was the one who, according to reporting on the matter, directly approached Kamala Harris to say, don't do this like anti-billionaire populist stuff. There were also major boosters of the Dem Party that actively wanted, Lena Khan gone. Like, they were open about it. They kept saying that they wanted that, which is completely unacceptable.
Alright, let's wrap this all up into one tight bow and send you on your way. There is no alt-left pipeline because a political radicalization pipeline requires a few things to begin. Charismatic voices with massive investments from deep political pockets, subtly stoking the flames of fear en masse and in the public sphere. The Republican Party specifically engineered the right-wing media apparatus to do these things, and there are no equivalent voices on the left, no deep leftist pockets to invest in the potential voices that there may be, and perhaps most importantly, no additional fear generated by the community-focused ideals of leftist politics. Even if fear is generated by the left, as we saw earlier, that fear will make someone more likely to adopt conservative policy preferences. And this is why your average dissatisfied American won't fall down a pipeline to the alt-left, and is also perhaps why the left should attempt to increase organizational efforts rather than attempting to go high by meeting the right in the marketplace of ideas. Because the very fabric of the...
I 100% agree with these. I agree with this statement. I do. That's why I focus a lot of my efforts on beefing up organizing efforts. Like, that's why I have so much I have so much of a focus on protecting labor unions and pushing for unionization. Oh, never mind. Maybe he is a fan. Okay. Bro bought a mansion and says he's a communist. LOL. Didn't he buy to live with his family? No, he literally kicked his mother out on the streets. Now she's homeless. I think there may be an alt-left pipeline now, though. It may be more center-leaning than we think an alt-left might be. What do you mean? No matter what happens, it will never resemble the same alt-right pipeline because right-wing content creators are almost always funded by insanely wealthy billionaires and millionaires who understand the importance of divisive propaganda.
Marketplace is stacked against them. And that's it for this lovely political video.
Anyway, now, speaking of being the alt-left pipeline guy, I am going to be talking to Chris Doles of the Union of Federal Workers. I don't know if he's in here right now. Hold on. Hello?